You can also always find information about number of licensees per county. As business people, as patients, this is helpful information to know what's going on in your county. You can see it much better, closer up, when you're looking at it online. This is a new graphic that we created just to show where dispensaries are located throughout Oklahoma. You'll see the heavy population in the two largest urban areas, and then dispensaries sprinkled throughout Oklahoma. And here is a map of processors across Oklahoma. And if you guys are ready for this, I'm going to show you the grow, but you have to be ready. You ready? So it looks like they're concentrated where there's water, if I were making a guess. But the competition is obvious in this picture. Wanted to make it really, make those numbers really shine on a screen and let you know how many licensees we have in Oklahoma. And to switch gears a little bit and just talk about what's going on within OMMA, I'll talk about our staffing. You'll recall last August, we had just right around 100 employees at OMMA, and part of the outcry at that time was that we did not have enough people on staff to go out and do the inspections across the state that need to be done. As of today, we have 217 full-time employees with a few outstanding job offers, and with training coming up, we will have 230 as of July 1. This shows a lot of progress in a very short period of time. With any staff up that's quick like that, there are a lot of growing pains. There is a lot of training needed and a lot of time needed to get people ready to go out on their own representing OMA. But we have risen to the challenge, and I'm very proud of the staff that we have put together. We do have 76 positions open out there. I don't foresee that we will need to fill all of those. We're keeping them open, though, just in case we have a need to fill more inspector positions in specific parts of the state. As we move towards a standalone agency outside of the health department's umbrella, there were a few key positions that I needed to fill immediately, and those have already been filled. We recently hired a CFO, so that's a chief financial officer or chief fiscal officer, however you want to look at it. We have never had one of these at OMA. We have always done all of our finances through the health department. So this is a new day where we will have our own finance department. The CFO we hired actually came from another state agency. He will begin July 5th, and he will be expected to hit the ground running because we have a lot of work to do to be prepared to be our own agency by November 1st. On November 1st, we'll do all our own payroll, our own budgeting, our own accounts payable. All of those things are done by the health department right now. We also hired a chief operations officer to oversee all operations. So that includes human resources, our data collection, and much more. I can't think right now on the spot, but COO is a big job at OMA, and we also hired someone from another state agency into that position. So they're going to be able to come in and hit the ground running instead of have to go through the normal training that you have to go through if you come from the private sector. We hired our first ever HR director, and we recently hired another enforcement agent in Northeast Oklahoma, so that puts us at 2 in Northeast Oklahoma and 6, I believe, in Oklahoma City and southern Oklahoma, all the way over to western. They're located in Oklahoma City, but they travel the rest of the state. And we are working specifically to place compliance inspectors in areas in rural counties right now. We are pretty well staffed up in Oklahoma County and the surrounding, but we are working to identify good candidates in rural areas. And our Director of Compliance, Michelle Reddish, is here if you have any specific questions about that from the council. We have a lot of events going on, and I wanted to just give you a peek into what's going on behind the scenes on a daily basis at OMA. One big thing we're doing, and we touched on it at the last meeting, but we've made a lot of progress since that last meeting, is we're planning a conference. As of right now, we do have it planned for the fall, but we are hitting some bumps in the road that come with planning things of this magnitude in state government. So we will put the exact dates out there once we're able to fully finalize them per state law. But I want to give you a big picture of what to expect. We are going to have 4 different lanes. So we'll have one lane for patients, one for commercial licensees specifically, one for state agencies, and then one for, I can't remember, somebody help me. Nope. Anyway, we'll find out in a minute. But there are 4 lanes. We want these tracks to be very specific to what you all want to know. So if you are a patient, you are going to come in and you're going to be able to choose from different breakout sessions to learn different information from various speakers. Same with all the different tracks. I'll get you more information once somebody back there helps me out. And I'm very excited about this because that's one of the main things that I keep hearing across the board is that we don't communicate enough with our licensees. We don't communicate enough with Oklahoma citizens, with state agencies. So this is our attempt to start an annual conference where we can all come together and just talk about everything. This is not an industry conference. This is not CannaCon. This is a state agency educational conference. I'm really excited about it, so please stay tuned. You'll find out more. We are going to get back to having working groups and roundtables coming into our offices, talking to us about what's going on. We kind of took a hiatus as we went through legislative session and metric implementation, but we are ready to get back to those. Our first go at that will be this summer, and you'll find out more info. I don't have a date for you at this moment, but we're working on it. We are moving our offices to the Capitol complex, meaning in walking distance of the Capitol. Our plan is to have a walk-in area, so when you're ready to renew your license, you can come in and ask questions of a real live person. We are not ready for that yet because our first floor is not renovated. The area where we would accept people has not been renovated just yet, but we also don't have the right staff in place to accept people in to meet with them one-on-one. We need to do training and we need to finish renovating, and then we will open it up for appointments for you to come in and ask questions. And that's going to supplement our call center and other ways that you can get in touch with us by email, by online boxes and that kind of thing. Any questions from the council on what's going on at OMA events? A few members of our leadership and I were able to travel to a conference. It's called CANRA, and it's an association of cannabis regulators. So we got to meet with all of the different cannabis regulators across the U.S., and the information that we learned was invaluable. I can't tell you how much we learned at this conference. Just learning what they're going through versus what we're going through, the problems we're all seeing, the bumps in the road we're seeing. For the first time, I have a feeling of external support. I hadn't really felt that before. I now know who to call. I can pick up the phone and call the director in Colorado or in Oregon and ask what they did in certain situations. So it's a fantastic experience, and I just wanted to let you all know that I did that as well as Barrett, Michelle, and our lab director, Lee Rhodes. I was invited to speak at a cannabis banking conference in Washington, D.C. coming up, so I will be out there speaking on behalf of the industry needing to have legalized banking and also patients needing to have legalized banking in Oklahoma. Been getting a lot of questions on the federal level regarding not only decriminalization, but talks regarding interstate commerce compacts between states, regarding Delta 8 regulation, regarding amendments to the Farm Bill. So there are a lot of conversations going on the federal level as well as here on the state level. And then we have all been out across the state talking about what OMA does and getting feedback from the community at various events, including chambers of commerce, cities and counties, legislative and executive branch, agency working groups, and industry groups. These things keep us busy. That's why I wanted to tell you about them. And then just to give you an update on what's going on as we transition to our own agency, there is a lot going on. We have a lot to do in a very short period of time. We are up for the challenge, and we are leaning on a lot of our sister agencies to help us. So one thing that we are focused on right now is the IT piece. So getting all of our emails, our website, all of that transferred over out from underneath the health department umbrella. That is a key part of what we're doing right now, and we're working with OMES on that. We're working with the health department to transfer our employees over, working on transferring all of our financials and our contracts, and we will be separating, as I said earlier, 3 very key departments that have been intertwined with OSDH will now just be OMA without that OSDH umbrella, and those are HR, legal, and finance. The budget request to the legislature is going to increase for fiscal year 2023 as we transition. It will level out in subsequent years, and I'm going to go through the finances in just a moment. Any questions on this from the council? Oh, I don't know how I'm turning the page. I am going to give a very high-level metric update from where I sit, but there will be opportunities and updates from various people in the room. So mine's very high level. Marianne Roberts is going to give us a specific legal update, and then when we get to the part of the agenda where council members ask questions, that's where council members can talk about metric questions, concerns, all of that, and we are here to answer those questions. So the number of licensees that were credentialed in metric on May 26th, you'll see on the screen, is over 9,000. You'll recall from that very first slide that we have over 11,000 licensees. So Mary Ann's going to give an update on what's going on with those, with the difference. And there have been several pretty consistent issues that have been brought to our attention since May 26th that we've been working on behind the scenes. One of those is the third-party integrators, so the APIs being cut off from integrating all the data on May 26th due to bandwidth or technology issues. A lot of people who were still doing beginning inventory on May 26th were slowed down. We have created a solution for that I believe we will be addressing on this panel. Thank you. And we also have a solution for the mail running slow and delivering tags after May 26th. A couple of specific lab issues we are working on right now. Metric didn't have it opened up for labs to return that reserve sample back, but also decontamination. So we are asking Metric to open that back up to allow those to be returned to the processor or grower. And then transport licenses not being credentialed in Metric did create a lot of issues up front, but I believe we have addressed most of those through our legal department. And then we have a lot of updates to our FAQs because we're trying to keep them updated. Just as soon as we see that there are lots of questions going on, we're updating them so that we're answering them all at once. And our FAQ document is online and pretty easy to find if you need it. And if you have reason to believe a business is violating OMA rules, there are a couple of ways you can get a hold of us, and we do appreciate you getting a hold of us. You can do the OMA compliance at ok.gov inbox, call the call center, or you can fill out the complaint form. You probably recognize the tax revenue report that we put online every month and we put on our social media accounts. I wanted to put this on here, and I'm going to go into more details in the subsequent slides so that you see where these dollars actually go. I'll highlight, though, that under the SQ 788 tax for 2022, January through May, we've brought in $24 million. The state and local sales tax, which is the side that OMA never sees, that's money that goes to your city, your county, and it goes to the state through a separate fund. In 2022 has brought in $31.5 million so far, or 31.6. I know this is a lot, but I'm going to talk through it and hopefully help shed some light and some clarity on where all of these dollars have gone. All right. What you'll see, I can't point with my left hand. What you'll see over here, the dark orange to the top was our authorized budget. So that first year, fiscal 2019, we were authorized to spend $5.8 million. We actually spent 3.7. Okay? So you skip to 2020, we were authorized to spend 25.6. We spent 6.7, which that's very low, but I think that's probably because of us not hiring during that year. 2021 authorized 25.5, spent 18.1. Fiscal year 2022, which ends the last day of this month, it ends June 30th. We were authorized to spend 42.1. We spent 27.3 so far, but you'll see there's an asterisk because we don't have all of our expenses inputted yet. We will have them all inputted by the end of this month. But going back, let's talk about the green one. So this is our tax and fee revenue. The tax and fee revenue is the total or the dark green, the dark green. First year, 27.5. Wait. Oh, no, I'm misstating it. The total is up here of all revenue that we brought in. So for that first year, 2019, we brought in 33.3, and out of that, 27.5 was from the taxes. Am I saying that right? Am I saying it right?
27.5 is licensing fees.
Okay.
And the dark green is taxes and licensing fees. So it's the total.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So then you have, I've looked at this a million times, but I guess being in front of you guys, I am losing my memory. All right. So we have for 2020, 63.9 total revenue. Brought in, and out of that 38.3 million was the license revenue only. And then you'll see 2021 74.3, so it's growing, with 48.6 being in license revenue. And then 2022 64 brought in so far as of March 2022, so we are a little behind on this when this was updated. But the point being, you'll see our budget versus what's brought in, and then the difference. That blue bar is the difference. And this is the money that is appropriated by the legislature. It's left for them to appropriate, I will say that. That's the difference. It's put into what's called a revolving fund. The specific fund is number 248. And the legislature is able to then disperse it as the citizens voted for in State Question 788, which would be 25% to mental health and substance abuse, 75% to common education. So you'll see if you can read that, it's small, but of the 90 million, since I'm just gonna go back to 2020 because we are still digging into the records from 2019, but of the 90 million, so if you add 38.3, 48.8, and then this year they don't have, they have to wait until the end of June to see how much is truly left. But of the 90 million, 67.5 of that went to common ed. And we dug into the numbers ourselves. We went back and read through all of the appropriation bills that the legislature did in those years to pull out what they did with the 248 fund money. We wanted to be able to present that to you all. We're still digging. We're still making sure we have a good handle on understanding where that money's gone so that we can report that to you. But it's also a legislative function for the appropriation chairs as they appropriate each session. Clear as mud, I know. But don't forget, this is all open records. This is all available for anyone's viewing at any time, all of it. Council questions on this slide? Dr. Stan Mills?
Yes, as a state agency, I am assuming that you're budgeted for, say, 25 million and you spend 6. So since you didn't spend it all, it goes back into the revolving fund, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that's all I was.
And there is another fund, the 206 fund, that is holding, I believe, about $12 million right now that's specifically for mental health and substance abuse programs. That was set aside as a specific fund at the health department, and it's about $12 million right now. Any other questions from the council? This shows what we've spent it on, and or where our money goes. So if you look at just this fiscal year, so fiscal year begins July 1 of each year in state government. No, I have my notes. All right. One thing I wanted to note is that we have seen a year-over-year decrease in license fees since this past November. And we've seen a year-over-year decrease in excise tax since February. So we're watching that to hopefully get an understanding of the trends moving forward. It's hard for us to set our budget or make big plans when we're not really sure what the next year will hold. All right, so you'll see that 34% of the $42 million that we set our budget for this year went to personnel costs. 0.38 on travel and training, 43.45 on contracts, and I'm going to give you a list of some of those contracts. OBN, Bureau of Narcotics, OTC, which is the Tax Commission, OSDH, which is the Health Department, contracts with outside counsel, our mail machine, Pitney Bowes, so we can mail out licenses, our rent that we pay for our space, plus the overhead, and then OMES for our website and tech support. 0.48 for equipment, 0.85 for supplies, and then other. And I'm sure you'd like to know what other is, so I have a list of those as well. Other generally includes IT costs like servers, software licensing, creating and printing patient cards, analytics and data collection, and software like Thintia and Complia. So our software licenses, our software renewals, all of that goes into other. And now that we will be our own agency, we are going to be brought into this room every fall, this exact room every fall, to defend and go through our budget with the legislature. So that's another opportunity for you all to be present and be heard on our budget every fall. I don't have a date yet, obviously, but they will go through our budget line by line and approve it or not. Is that correct? Fall? Okay. All right, questions from the council on this slide? David?
Looking at contracts OB&DD with the new sheriff enforcement, the $5 million fund, do you think that offsets OB&DD or in addition to OB&DD?
So the question is about a bill that was at the legislature that would have OMA send $5 million to a sheriff's grant fund. Only one half of that bill passed. So they created the revolving fund, but they did not pass a bill directing us to put money into the revolving fund. So we have a revolving fund right now, but it's empty. We're having conversations with the sheriff's departments and the legislature to see what their intent is, what they'd really like us to do, if they're going to come back next year and pass that second part. But the $5 million to OBN is what we paid them for this fiscal year. But as of right now, I don't believe we are sending them that money for the fiscal year 22-23. At least we haven't been requested to. Any other questions on this slide? Mike, Irvin?
Just to clarify, that is a budgeted amount, not actual expenditures or actual and projected expenditures. Those are budgeted amounts only, correct?
Barrett says yes. But I think you had an or question. So I think these are actuals, but we haven't finished the year. So it's, yeah. These are actuals up through when this was created, which I believe would have been a couple weeks ago.
Actual plus projected through the end of June
Fiscal year.
2022. Correct. Okay.
And this is why we need a strong CFO, because we need someone that is living and breathing this and knows this inside and out. Oops. All right, so that was the last slide of my presentation, but we have an agenda item for discussion and questions over my report. So I'm open to questions or discussion. All right, we will move on. We have Barrett Brown here to do a legislative session update for us. With session just recently wrapping up, there is a lot to talk about, so I will turn it over to you, Barrett.
Thank you, Adrienne. I know what you're all thinking right now. You're thinking, oh boy, I can't wait to sink my teeth into another PowerPoint. Well, I have two words for you. Buckle up, because this PowerPoint has some fancy transitions. So just get ready for it. I'm trying to make this exciting, all right? Look at that. Do you think I could have the mouse? Will it reach this far? We're about to find out. Whoops. There we go. Okay, so these are ranked not in order of importance or my favorites. These are just in ascending order based on House bills first and then Senate bills. So the first is House Bill 2179, which I'm sure you've probably heard something about. It's tiered licensing fees. So this first table is for processors, dispensaries remain the same for the initial fee of $2,500. The annual non-refundable fee thereafter will be 10% of the sum of 12 calendar months of sales and excise tax generated by that dispensary. Testing labs went across the board up to $20,000. And as I mentioned, this first table is for processors, so beginning at $2,500 up to $20,000 based on either the number of pounds of biomass processed or liters purchased. And on this second page, well, wait, skipped one. Who's got a question? Dr. Mills.
Yes, that table that you were talking about, that was for commercial growers on the screen. You go back? And
Trying to go back here.
Didn't see any processors on that at all.
How do we go back? Apologies. Technical difficulties. Keep going. One more. Gives you an extra chance to appreciate the transitions. Okay, so what was the question?
Yeah, you were talking about the processor part, but the grower was on the screen, so.
I'm so glad you asked that, because then we get that transition again. And House Bill 2179, Part 2. This is the commercial growers. So these tables are broken up. The table on the left is for indoor growers. The table on the right is for outdoor. Indoor is tiered based on the square feet of canopy. Outdoor is tiered based on the number of acres that the facility has in terms of canopy. And then, as you can see on the bottom, if you have a combination of indoor and outdoor at the same location, then you have to get 2 separate licenses for each type and adhere to the fees for those licenses. Go for it.
I'm sure you've read the bill closely and are aware of the anomaly in Tier 8 on the outdoor growers. The language on Tier 8 is not the same verbiage as the language on Tier 7 for the indoor growers. And so the 51st acre on the outdoor grow, are you aware of this? Have you?
Yes.
And there is a plan to reconcile that at some future legislative date?
I hope so. Mr. Cantrell.
On the dispensary new tier, is that 12-month period the trailing, or is it the 12 months of the most recent licensure, or what's the period there?
Yeah, so the idea is that if you apply for a new dispensary, let's say, your initial fee is $2,500, regardless of anything. And then once you've been licensed for 12 months, then when you pay for your renewal, that renewal will be 10% of the sum of excise and sales taxes generated over the previous 12 months. So it's the licensed period without actually saying the licensed period, I think is the idea.
So the license period of the license being renewed.
Yes.
And you all did, correct, fix the issue of the new renewal date being at the time of the application's acceptance, as opposed to backdating it to be an actual 12-month period?
I don't know.
Like if I were to apply for a renewal license of any type, and it took 3 months to process, historically, the date of final approval would be my new licensure date, and then it'd be 12 months from that. Is that still the case? As opposed to being a, locked-in 12-month period?
We haven't changed.
That would still be the case then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it would be of the 12 months of the original licensure date, not the immediately preceding 12 months, correct?
Yes, I think I understand your question, and I think that's correct.
Basically, historically, we get a
Yep.
new renewal date depending on when the application was actually approved. I'm just confirming that the 12-month period we're looking at is the first 12 months of the most recent license, not the most immediate 12 months, correct?
Yes.
Well, and I understand what you're saying because we've had some issues with
Yeah.
licenses that are in limbo for 12
Right.
months or more.
Which is what I thought you had addressed already.
That's exactly what we're working on right now.
Okay.
Any license has been sitting in limbo for more than that 90-day period is being addressed right now. And moving forward, we don't intend to allow that to continue to happen because the statute actually clarifies that it shouldn't be happening, that we should approve within 90 days
Right.
or not.
Perfect. Final question is just confirming dispensaries top out at 10,000. You didn't touch on that.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And
Mr. Duzan. Yeah.
Brian
Mr.
Duzan,
Duzan, the
Green
question.
since everything you're getting ready to talk to went through the legislative process, these will all be incorporated into the OMMA rules within the next 6 months or so.
Correct. It actually takes place over the next 2 years, given the effective dates of all of these pieces of legislation. But I've got a slide on that at the very end.
Sorry.
Nope, you're good. Any other questions on this one? Mr. Irvin?
This involves two pieces of legislation, this one included, and the reconciliation of the two. So I'm going to ask it here, and it may be more appropriately addressed later at some point. Given that this requires a separation of an outdoor grow versus an indoor versus a greenhouse grow, also given that the legislature has passed a moratorium on additional licenses. So when these additional licenses are required because now they're under the same current license, will the moratorium affect the split of the license? Because a new license is being created because you have one license today that covers an outdoor and an indoor on the same property. And now that will be two licenses. We'll have to create a new license. So how will that be treated by OMA moving forward? Would that be just the same license, and will that be not covered by the moratorium? Will it be an additional license which will be required and prohibited by the moratorium? And would OMMA seek guidance from the legislature affecting that issue in the coming sessions?
I trust Barrett, but I also want to just say what's in my brain, which is That bill goes into effect in 2023, the tiered licensing, correct? 2023. We will be creating the rules soon and seeking counsel. But so as of right now, we don't have the answer for you, but I think just the fact that you brought that to our attention is very helpful. So thank you.
And there will be plenty of time to ask legislative guidance on that matter, as well as to make a determination by the agency. And I did just want to make the agency aware. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Moving on. House Bill 3019. So this, very simple, medical marijuana or medical marijuana products may be in clear packaging, but prior to leaving the dispensary, they have to be placed in an exit package, which the bill defines as an opaque bag. And then there's a short requirement as for additional labeling that just says you have to say, for use by medical marijuana patients only and keep out of reach of children. Look at that. House Bill 3208, one that I'm sure you've never heard anything about. This is the Moratorium Bill. So this says that OMMA shall declare and establish a moratorium on processing and issuing new medical marijuana business licenses for dispensaries, processors, and commercial growers. So it begins on August 1st of 2022, runs until August 1st of 2024. The executive director may terminate that moratorium before August 1st of 2024, but only upon determining that all pending license reviews, inspections, and investigations have been completed. The bill says any license that's received on or before August 1st of 2022 will be processed. So as long as the application is submitted by August 1st or sometime that day, it will be processed. It does not apply to renewals or changes of ownership or location, nor does it apply to testing labs, waste disposal, or all the other license categories. Any questions on this one? Mr. Kell.
Yes. At any given time, can you lift one license? Or do we have to lift, or on your moratorium, are you able to lift all three licenses at the same time, or can you say we got enough dispensaries, we don't have enough dispensaries, can you lift one license at a time and stop the moratorium?
It's a great question, Mr. Kell. As we move into this, I believe those things will become more clear. It's not clear in the statute, so we do need to look at how that can be interpreted through our legal counsel and in speaking with the legislature.
Any other questions? Are you a member of the council, sir? I don't think. Not accepting questions. Questions from council members only, right? I'm sorry, sir. Questions from council members only.
Perhaps a prospective question. Given that there are state questions potentially on the ballot, potentially in November, and a moratorium is in place, and two of the questions deal with adult use, not medical marijuana. This moratorium is specifically in statute for medical marijuana licenses. So if one or more of those state questions were to pass, issuance of new licenses for adult use would not be affected by House Bill 3208. And I made that as a statement, and it was really, would House Bill 3208 affect those adult use licenses?
I would need to pull up the language and see make sure the statute is clearly narrow enough that it only applies to medical marijuana. I don't have it in front of me, so I would need to see the. Okay, I figured you knew what you were saying. So I believe this was intended to only be for medical marijuana licensure.
I do have a question.
Mr. Cantrell?
Presumably, we're about to see a lot of licenses go up for sale outside of approval of a transfer or change of ownership or what have you by OMMA. Is the agency going to regulate that market in any capacity, or any thoughts on that?
No.
What do you mean? I mean, we'll regulate just under our mandate, but is there something extra you're thinking of?
I was just curious if you all had, have any additional thoughts on what that'll look like or how we'll be regulated.
It will be, I mean, we will regulate any business, whether they are operating under a transferred license, just the same as we regulate all other businesses. But are you thinking like anti-competitive or antitrust issues, or?
Nothing that specific. Really, I just foresee this being thousands of licenses going up for sale, and just, protecting potentially the purchasers of that from taking on a license that had been operated in a non-compliant way, what have you.
I think that would warrant further discussion and just kind of clarification. So can we talk about that more after this? Thank you.
Any more questions? House Bill 3929, otherwise known as process validation. So OMMA by January 1 of 2024 shall develop standards and requirements for process validation. The bill has a long list of things that that those standards shall include. This is a brief and non-inclusive list of all of that. Like the initial requirements for setting up process validation. There's a requirement that all licensees who participate in this voluntary program use a certified process validation lab, et cetera, et cetera. As I mentioned, it is voluntary. It has an annual $5,000 registration fee, and there are heavy financial penalties for a lot of various violations that are listed exclusively in the bill. I would encourage you to read it if you have any questions about the specifics of that. Any questions on this one? Oop, Dr. Mills.
Yes, just a quick question. Is there such an animal as a certified validation laboratory?
Yes. The bill requires OMMA to license or certify certified process validation laboratories.
So you will do that eventually?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's January 1 of 2024 is when OMMA has to promulgate the rules setting out the standards of this program. I'm terrible at PowerPoint, apparently. All right, the next one, House Bill 3971. This is the secret shopper bill. Similar to the last one, it is January 1 of 2024 is when OMMA shall implement rules to employ quote-unquote secret shoppers. Essentially, a secret shopper goes into a dispensary, purchases enough medical marijuana or medical marijuana products to make 5 test samples. 4 of those shall be sent to different licensed laboratories. Specifically, if possible, the licensed laboratory who originated the testing for this specific product. And then 1 sample is retained by OMMA to verify in case we need to. If there is a unanimous contaminant failure amongst the 4 labs that the samples are received by, then that is a public recall that is triggered at that point. If it's in between 1 and 4 labs that fail it for contaminants, then that triggers further investigation by OMMA and a verification of that 5th sample. In the first year of 2024, it's a minimum of 50 secret shopper inspections. Every year thereafter, it is 10% of licensed dispensaries annually. Any questions on this one?
I do.
Mr. Lewis.
I believe the language there is shall conduct 10%. Do you have the authority to go above and beyond if it warrants, or have you not yet made an interpretation?
We could certainly explore that. I believe the language is shall conduct a minimum of 10%, if I'm recalling correctly, but it's been a couple of nights between legislative session and now, so I could be misremembering. Yeah. Of the 15. All right, House Bill 4056. So OMMA shall receive recommendations from a board or committee of licensed labs that are ISO accredited by June 1st of 2023. Those recommendations are for the standards and equipment that should be used by testing labs for testing medical marijuana products. Within 90 days upon receipt of those recommendations, OMMA must promulgate new rules or modify existing rules to adhere or to set up those standards for equipments and processes to be used by testing labs. Beginning June 1 of 2024, testing labs have to adhere to those standards. Failure to comply with those standards shall result in permanent revocation of the testing lab license. Any questions on that one? Moving on. Look at that. Senate Bill 1367. So this one is increasing the penalties on the transfer for value to non-licensed or non-authorized persons, otherwise known as diversion. So this is increasing the fines for businesses. The first violation is going from $1,000 to $5,000. Any subsequent violation is $15,000. If there are any violations for inaccurate or fraudulent reporting, similar structure where it's $5,000 fine on the first violation, $10,000 on any subsequent violations, and a revocation of that license. Similarly for patients, if it's a transfer for value, $400 for the first violation, and this is an administrative fine on patients, $1,000 administrative fine, and revocation of the patient license on subsequent violations. If a patient or caregiver shares less than 3 grams, then that's only an administrative fine of $400. Any questions on that? All righty. I grouped these two together because they're pretty similar. So Senate Bill 1511, which was passed in March, add commercial growers to the businesses that cannot be located within 1,000 feet of a school. That was effective on March 30th upon the governor's signature. Any commercial growers licensed and in operation at that time were not affected. Senate Bill 1726 adds technology center schools into the definition of schools in our definitions statute, which is 63 OS 427.2. Any questions on those ones from council members? Senate Bill 1543. So this is the standalone bill beginning November 1 of 2022. We're our own agency. All the property, records, assets, obligations, etc. The list is like 30 words long. Will be transferred from OSDH to OMMA. As Adria said, we're working to stand up our own finance department, HR department, all the other stuff that you don't really think about that are involved in the day-to-day operations of a state agency. Something that Mr. Cantrell pointed out at the last meeting, but the legislature, in passing this bill, it included a repeal of the section that creates the Medical Marijuana Advisory Council. So on November 1 of 2022, this group will cease to be, as determined by the legislature. Do you have any questions from council members on this one? Mr. Cantrell.
First, my reading of the bill is a removal of the requirement for this council.
Correct.
Not a removal of the council itself.
Correct.
Then it is OMMA's decision to disband this, and if so, why, and what's the intent moving forward with soliciting industry input?
I would just say stay tuned. As Adria included in her update, we are in the process of coming up with what our plan is going to be on stakeholder engagement, as we call it, with industry, with state agencies, with patients, all across the board.
And before November 1, we have one more official meeting in September, and look forward to more guidance there and more clarity. We definitely value and need input from industry and patients, and so there's no intent to just disband the receiving of that. And so if it looks like this, or if it looks like a more robust version of this, that's what we're working on. And for a reminder, 1543, the way that the legislature's been going on state agencies in the past few years is instead of giving them boards and councils, they're making them directly appointed by whoever the governor at the time is. That's what they've done with OMMA. So they've made the executive director of the OMMA directly accountable to the governor, who is directly accountable to the people of Oklahoma. Under the current governor, he will make the decision on whether I am the appointee or not by November 1. And then it requires Senate approval in the legislative session following that.
Any other questions on this one? Senate Bill 1704. So the first kind of sections of this bill dovetail with Senate Bill 1367. But the main provisions of this are that all medical marijuana business employees have to apply for and receive a credential beginning on January 1 of 2024. OMMA may contract with a third-party vendor to provide those services, and then OMMA gets to determine what services those are and the costs and prices according to the bill. And additionally is sort of the dovetailing with 1367 provisions. It gives OMMA the authority to revoke the license after an investigation of any person directly involved with the diversion of medical marijuana or medical marijuana products. Any questions on that one? Senate Bill 1737. So this would require that all outdoor commercial growers register with the Department of Agriculture, Forestry, and Food Services as an environmentally sensitive crop owner. All commercial growers must also post signage at the perimeter of their property that include the list here, the business name, the physical address of the licensed business, the phone number of the business, and the business license number. And there's requirements that OMMA promulgate rules to affect the provisions of this. And there's even requirement of the size of the sign. It's 18 by 24 inches, I believe.
I do have one point on that.
Mr. Cantrell?
I'm speaking based on feedback I've received. We don't have a grow up, but to my knowledge, first, can you confirm this? If you don't have the sign, it's automatic revocation, correct?
Yes.
And then I also wanted to point out, based on feedback I've gotten from growers, that certain insurers, in order to place a commercial insurance policy, require you to not have signage so that you don't, draw attention to the grow up. This could be in conflict with people's ability to get business insurance. I can't speak more to it than that. Just wanted to point it out to y'all.
That's interesting.
I can tell you our insurance policy requires that there be no signage placed anywhere on the property that identifies our facility as anything to do with a marijuana facility. They will drop us, they inspect us once a year. That is one of the checkpoints on the list, that there be no signage that would identify. I don't know how OMMA can affect the rules so that it qualifies or abides by the statute and yet still allows these businesses to retain their insurance policies. But I would encourage OMA to investigate that and visit with growers as well as insurers to determine if there is a path forward that can be amenable to all parties.
Thank you. To your knowledge, Mr. Irvin, was that communicated with the authors of this legislation? This is the first time I'm learning of it, but we didn't author the legislation, so I'm hopeful that was communicated.
I would answer that question by saying I do not have a grow. I only have a processing facility, and processing facilities are not included in this legislation.
So to your knowledge, nobody communicated that with the legislature? Okay.
Mr. Lewis?
I am a grower. These may be true, but I can tell you I just renewed our insurance last week, and this was not a provision in our carrier, so it seems to be maybe carrier dependent.
Thank you.
Mr. Kell.
Yes, I worked with the legislator on this bill, and he was not aware of this.
Okay. Oh, Ms. Boyle.
Hi, yes. As someone who represents an agency that does inspections based on complaints, this was something that was very important to our inspectors for their physical safety. If they are not aware that they are coming upon a legal grow operation, they have been instructed to not engage at all. So is this separate from signage just letting you know that it is a licensed operation? Because that's something that our employees really needed for their physical safety.
Yeah, and we heard that for the record, Ms. Boyle, I'm sorry, I said that name. You remind me of my friend Sarah. Is from DEQ, so inspectors go out to DEQ, but there are other agencies that also, as you know, if you have a grow, will need to come out to your facility. Outside of what's on your slide, Barrett, can you clarify, do you know if there's anything that requires the word cannabis or marijuana to be on the sign?
There's nothing in the bill that requires that. There is, I think, perhaps some flexibility in the administrative rules of OMMA to determine any additional requirements that might be on that sign. So that could certainly be a part of that conversation.
Yeah, I cannot speak to insurance requirements or anything, but something that would just allow our folks to know that they have a license with you is really all we need. So, thanks.
Dr. Mills.
Yes, defining perimeter might be helpful. Because if you have, 500 acres and you've got 1 acre in the middle of this thing, maybe that sign needs to be on that 1 acre and not on the perimeter of the larger block of property, just as a thought.
Yeah, I believe the intent of the legislature is that this sign be viewable from the road. So, but yes, that's something. Again, we'll explore in administrative rules. Which, if there's no other questions, leads me to my next slide, titled Administrative Rules. So there's going to be a ton of administrative rules in between now and probably mid-January. So emergency rules, this is just sort of a brief, high-level view of things. So probably somewhere around the middle of July will be the first round of emergency rules, and that is to update our rules with statutes that came effect immediately upon passage from the legislature and signature by the governor, or statutes that passed and became effective on July 1. Probably around September 10th or 11th, our permanent rules that have been at the legislature and were approved during this session will become effective, which means a second round of emergency rules to incorporate the emergency rules that we just did in July with the permanent rules that became effect on September 10th or 11th. Then again on November 1, all of our rules as they currently are written will expire in the Department of Health title of the administrative code. So we will need to promulgate a third round of administrative rules to incorporate all of the rules that we've talked about heretofore in our own title of the administrative code. And then any statutes that came into effect on November 1, we'll have to update our rules to account for those as well. Then again, in probably somewhere in mid-January to capture any bills that became effective on January 1 of 2023. And then kind of simultaneous with all of that, we'll have to embark on another permanent rulemaking process sometime between now and next February. I'm sure that was clear.
This is painful. So just know that this does not bring us joy. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of time, but it's how the law works, and we have to do this. So next, Barrett has a slide that with a roadmap that we created just to try to simplify the process. But per usual, nothing at OMA is simple. And as a young agency, we are required to come in and do rulemaking more than other agencies. Usually other agencies, like DEQ, for example, might do rulemaking once a year. Once we get to that point, we can all celebrate and know that we are in a good place. But as long as the legislature continues to come in and pass bills that affect our industry in large ways, we're going to continue to have to do these emergency rulemaking sessions throughout the year.
Yes, I personally eagerly await the day where we only do one round of permanent rules and perhaps the occasional emergency rule, but alas, here we are. I'd also be remiss if I didn't direct everybody to our website. We've changed our entire website, but specifically as it relates to administrative rules. Now, under the Rules and Regulations tab, there is a link that's just the current rules. So if you go to our website and you're like, what are OMMA's current rules today? Because they probably changed. You click that link and you're taken exactly to the rules as they are in effect at the time that you clicked that link. Previous versions are available in other sections on that page, but if you just want to know what's into effect today, you can click that link and be taken right there. And we will keep that page updated precisely as we proceed through this whole process. So if you ever have any questions, just go to our website. This is, Mr. Duzan.
With your roadmap there on your rules, isn't there also kind of a law that you can only implement rules that have fees during the legislative session?
There may be a provision to that effect. Mary Ann is saying yes, so I believe her.
I've went through that before.
So this is the roadmap that we have on our website right now. There are things like stops on this roadmap that will change on November 1. So just stay tuned for those updates. We will keep this graphic either in this form or a similar form updated on our website. But this kind of gives you an idea of the road that lies ahead for OMMA as it relates to administrative rules. A very exciting topic. That is the end of my presentation and the final transition. So we'll just open it up for discussion and questions from the council on this presentation that I know you all enjoyed. Okay.
I'm going to take a picture of you guys taking a picture of me. I'm going to pretend you weren't talking, but I just understood your question. So, yeah, and with open meetings, in order to do open comments, there are legal requirements, time limits. It's not just as easy as allowing someone to come up and ask a question. And so we have tossed it back and forth on when and how to do that. As we move towards these working groups and roundtables that are not official open meetings, they're going to offer more opportunity just to have dialogue. And that's what we're really wanting to work towards.
But also, in response to Adria and her comments, during the permanent rulemaking process, after the publication of a notice of rulemaking intent in the register, that begins a 30-day period of public comment on the proposed permanent rules, and it concludes with a public hearing to solicit even more public comment. So any member of the public, feel free to comment on our permanent rules. That will be sometime in, I think, November, December, around there.
All right, I am pleased to move to our legal update with our senior legal counsel, Mary Ann Roberts. She is a fantastic addition to the team, and I'm very grateful to have her legal knowledge on our team. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mary Ann.
Thank you. First, I want to update you on the Metric lawsuit. This is the lawsuit that's pending in Oklahoma County. And surely everyone in this room knows that the TRO that was in place has been lifted, and the court-ordered date for compliance with Metric has come and gone. That was May 26th. There still are 3 issues still outstanding that will have to be litigated in the case. One of them is whether the licensees were wrongfully required to pay for implementation. Also, whether OMA has misapplied funds that were intended for cannabis use. And then finally, whether or not a class action case, which is what has been filed, whether or not that's appropriate under the law. So those 3 issues will continue through the legal system. There isn't a court date set yet, but there will be in the future. The next item is the process for noncompliance. This is regarding metric again. For everyone that, as of midnight on May 27th, had not activated an account in the system, they all received a notice that they had not done that and that there was a $500 fine for not doing that. That fine comes directly from our rules in Appendix C. It's the amount that is in our rules for any violation of inventory tracking. So 2,428 of those notices went out on May 27th. And so now we're trying to deal with all of that. Adria mentioned before there are some people working with third-party integrators. And those integrators, as they had the client's information and they were putting it into metric, the data was somewhat limited because of the rush to do that. And so some of those people who had complied, except for their third-party integrator not having the technical ability to get every single thing into metric, those are people we are identifying and contacting to rectify that situation. And then there's another group that was referred to. Those are people who activated an account before the deadline, ordered the tags for their product before the deadline, but Metric had not gotten the tags to those licensees. So we've also identified that group, and we're going through that group now to rectify the situation. There were some more in this number. I told you that had actually surrendered their license, and that information Metric did not have, or from Thintia. So those people are also being taken care of. So we're trying to deal with each group as well as we can, as fast as we can. Finally, there's a group of people who have asked for a hearing on the merits of the fine. Those people later this week will be receiving a notice of initial appearance, and they will show up in front of a judge. Those dates are going to be sometime mid-July. And they will show up in front of a judge. The judge will give them a date for their hearing on the merits, discuss any other legal issues that need to be handled at that time. So that's where we are on the whole process of noncompliance with metric. Yes, Mr. Duzan.
I kind of am a little bit taken with because we're one of those people that, because we are a testing laboratory, originally we did not get a transportation license, so we had to file a separate transportation license. Then they came back and said, well, now you have one. So we actually had two licenses, and we got one of your fines for our transportation license. We're fully integrated in metric with the lab and have been since day one. But we get a fine because our transport does not.
And you've just pointed out the other group. I'm trying to give you the biggest groups I can think of that people fall into, but that is another group that we are dealing with that issue.
Well, and then that becomes very harsh that I will have to drive to Oklahoma City to stand before a judge for, actually, what's today, the 20th? My transportation license ended today that we did not renew, so it just seems incredibly harsh for something that really wasn't our fault or our intent.
So if you're one of those people who shouldn't have gotten the fine, we want to make sure you know before any court date that your case has been resolved. So that is the goal, so that you don't have to make a trip for an initial appearance and prepare for a hearing on the merits.
Okay, because I responded to the email, then I got another email a week later going, oh, hey, you need to respond to the email. And I was like, already did, but I'll respond again, so.
Well, we've got a huge spreadsheet of thousands of people, and we're just working through them as fast as we can, and we want to get it right. So we don't want to rush through and make assumptions that will affect licensees in a negative way. Okay, Final topic is the recent recall. So after an investigation by OMA, we discovered that test results were not accurately being reported by a testing lab, Scale Laboratories. And there was further inspections, reviews of records, and we made some findings. First, that the lab reported passing test results to licensees on 138 samples that actually failed test for yeast and mold. They also reported passing test results on 9 samples that failed for Aspergillus, 5 samples that failed for E. coli, and 1 sample that failed for Salmonella. A few other findings of the inspection team: the lab didn't use appropriate procedures for record keeping, for testing of microbiological contamination, pesticides, or heavy metals. Also, they didn't use proper quality control methods, manipulated test data, and routinely deviated from standard operating procedures. So there were quite a few findings as a result of the investigation. And as a result, on May 18th, OMA issued a recall. We alerted 33 businesses and informed all of them of the 99 products that were at issue. This is by far the largest recall that OMA has dealt with in its short history. On May 19th, the following day, the Commissioner of Health found that this situation posed a threat to the public health, safety, and/or welfare. And as a result of that, he issued an emergency order that summarily suspended the license of the testing lab for the alleged violations. And those are 2 separate actions. There's a court action on the license issue related to the Commissioner of Health and his order. There's also the recall as a separate matter, but they go together, obviously. Are there any questions about that? Any questions about anything else for me? Yes, Mr. Cantrell.
If we have metric-related issues to bring to your attention, would that be appropriate here or during the metric update section of the next chunk?
So under number 6C is for council members to bring forward any metric issues or questions. But if you have a specific question about anything that Mary Ann has addressed, this is the appropriate time.
I do have one related to, so supposing there was a good faith effort to be metric compliant for whatever that means for your license type, but in our case, for example, we're dispensaries, so we have the extension, fortunately, but our point of sale provider dropped the ball, and we were then locked out from being able to build our beginning inventory, which we had hoped to do for reporting purpose simplicity. What is the best path to be granted an extension, who to reach out to? Because to my knowledge, we sent an email the following day after we learned that they hadn't gotten it done and have not heard a reply yet.
You should have heard a reply by now, so I'm not sure where that was directed to.
Maybe you can help me there. What path should a licensee follow in the event that they need an extension for something that happened that was outside of their control?
So if you'll email OMA hearing requests at ok.gov and explain the situation, but also include your request for a hearing. That way you don't waive that right. Licensees have 30 days from the day they receive the notice of the penalty to request a hearing. So anyone in doubt, not knowing whether or not you want to request a hearing, you should request a hearing to reserve that, and it can always be waived and resolved depending on the particular circumstances.
Sure. Let me clarify. We did not receive a fine. We're a dispensary, so we have that 90-day grace period. The functionality in metric was locked at that time. So this would not be in response to a notice of any kind. It would just be an attempt to get a little bit of an extension in specifically the beginning inventory functionality.
So my understanding, Mr. Cantrell, you were credentialed in Metric on time. You started your beginning inventory, but due to third-party integrator issues outside of your control, you were not able to complete your beginning inventory.
That's correct. So the reason we didn't need to do it as a dispensary, we have the additional 90 days, but we wanted to do it because, as I'm sure many people here can attest to, it is a reporting nightmare to try to do Metric and untagged. So we were trying to get it all tagged. Didn't happen. We just need an extension for that functionality to be opened back up.
Why don't you send an email to OMA Legal instead of the hearing request, since you're kind of a different situation?
For those listening, that would be omalegal@ok.gov.
It is.
And what specific information should be included in that request?
The circumstances of what you're asking for and why.
And please always include a license number when you communicate with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Dr. Mills.
Yes. Is there going to come a point in time, and this relates to the recall and the, shall I say, illicit activity of a laboratory? Is there going to be a point in time where OMA provides the industry with testing results for the laboratories, how they're doing, whether or not they can actually hit a number, and the frequency which they can hit a number on some of these tests? I mean, that really ought to be something that the industry would, I can tell you, I would like to know that.
There definitely have been discussions, even just recently after this recall, of doing exactly that. So it's a matter of figuring out the logistics of actually accomplishing it.
And it's actually been in the works for a while. This was one of those areas that was invaluable talking with other states. And other states are set up differently, obviously, but we all have the same job, which is to test cannabis products that will end up consumed by a human. So we are all figuring it out. That's the good news. There's no gold star state that has figured it out. That's not the good news for patients, but we're all working towards it together. So point being, I just talked around that. Point being, what we want to do, our end result will be a grade, A through F, on each lab, so that the industry knows where that lab lands, and we will have criteria. We have Becky from our labs in the back. Do you want to add anything to what I'm saying?
Hi, Becky Taylor. I'm the lab operations manager. Just to that note, we are in discussions of what that looks like, but definitely we're going there. There'll be some sort of and those of you that are in the medical field, how hospitals are ranked or rated, it'll be something sort of similar to that, where it'll be a ranking, a rating, and it'll encompass a lot of different criteria, like Director Berry said, as to how we arrive at that rating that laboratory receives.
The lab standards bill is going to be one step towards that as well, that we'll be working to implement on our side over the next couple of years. So there is a lot in the works, and we want to continue the conversations with you all on what would be helpful for industry, for sure. Mr. Dusan?
From the lab perspective, that's an accredited lab in other fields as well, from the DEQ and others, grading is a odd animal by the fact that you then have labs that spend an inordinate amount of energy just to get that grade. No, it doesn't matter what else they're doing. There's plenty of rules already in place for OMMA, for inspectors to go into labs and root out the inappropriate or illegal activity. I know the legislature, you guys, hands are tied. They legislate it and we implement it. But there's already an awful lot of rules out there to eliminate the bad players. We just need to be able to inspect and enforce.
Dr. Mills, just as a comment, yes, there's plenty of rules out there to root out the bad actors, but the incompetent ones can live on for a long time.
Do we have any other discussion or questions over the legal update from the council? Okay, we are going to move into advisory council member updates. You'll recall that you received a call for agenda items from Cassie, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, but we have Stephanie here. And thank you, you're doing great. But we ask the council members to send us agenda items so we can get them on the agenda ahead of time. That's part of the open meetings. But we went ahead and added metric updates so that any of you on the council that have questions or comments on metric or metric implementation can ask those or comment on those at that time. But first, as for council member updates, we have Christy Edelin, I believe I said it right, with an from the Oklahoma Center for Poison and Drug Information. Do all of the council members have the handout? And I would like the mouse, please. Sorry. Christy, I'm turning it over to you.
So for board members that are not aware of who I am or what the Poison Center does, so I am a pharmacist and clinical toxicologist for the Poison Center. We are a call center. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of the calls that come into us, so about 75 to 80% of our calls are going to be from a home setting. So kiddos getting into things, sips of bleach, medications, those types of things, people taking their medications twice, you name it, we get calls on all of it. And then about 20 to 25% of our calls are going to be from healthcare providers. So it may be a paramedic or an EMT that rolls up to someone that's overdosed or been exposed to a chemical, whatever it may be. Healthcare professionals working in emergency departments, ICUs. And basically all of our calls that we will follow them to determined outcome. So what that means is if we refer them to an emergency department, we will follow them, provide any clinical information, expectations of things that may be seen with that patient, and basically how to treat that patient. And so as you can imagine, the Poison Center data is great in identifying trends, outbreaks, those kind of things. And so what I've provided for you guys is just kind of some numbers, and the numbers kind of speak for themselves. The first page is basically all patients. So it's all age groups, and just looking at trends from 2010 to 2021. So you can see our call volume has increased significantly, of course, with the passage of medical marijuana. Down at the bottom, it's medical outcomes. I won't get into specifics as far as what qualifies as a minor, moderate, or major effect unless you guys really want me to. But we can see, especially with our pediatric population, we're starting to see an increase in those exposures, but then also an increase in our severity of medical outcomes. And then on the second page, that's really what I would like to highlight here. So that is specifically May 3rd. So there is a reason behind that date. So we actually switched to our new database on May 3rd of last year. So essentially I captured all exposures or cases that were called to the Poison Center from May 3rd to basically just last week. And I should have put it at the top, but basically there were 270 exposures in just a little over a year's time. Something to highlight, one of the downfalls of Poison Center data is this is only cases that are called to the Poison Center. So there's absolutely no obligation for certainly a parent or a healthcare provider or really anyone to call the Poison Center. So these are just cases that are being reported to our Poison Center. So as you can imagine, there's probably a lot more cases out there that are not being reported. So up at the top there, just some of the clinical effects. So of that 270, how many had CNS depression, so drowsiness. Whenever you're looking at mild versus moderate, so mild is, they're sleepy, whereas moderate is, it takes quite a bit to wake that kid up. Whereas severe, which I didn't include because it was a much smaller amount, those are kids that are typically ending up on ventilators, which is down there at the bottom as far as therapies go. So again, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. I'm happy to answer or try to answer any questions that you guys have about the numbers. I did want to kind of leave more so some of the clinical aspect to Dr. Ryan Brown, who is speaking after me. So if you have questions about, from an emergency provider standpoint of what they're seeing in the emergency department, he's probably a little bit better to speak about that. But as far as, how many of these kiddos are actually going in to the emergency department, so you can see that 26.7% were admitted to a non-critical care unit. 27.8%, basically, they went into the emergency department, they were treated and observed there and discharged to home, and then 7.8% were actually admitted to a critical care unit. Probably the three to highlight are those three that ended up on ventilators. I did look at that specifically. So one of those was a 5-year-old that had ingested reportedly 500 milligrams of THC, and a 12-month-old and a 3-year-old with unknown amounts. So that's something that we're seeing across the board. These kids are not just getting like 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams. These kids are getting insane amounts. So eating a donut hole, I have a 2-year-old, and he can clear, 10 to 12 donut holes. And so whenever we have 1,000 milligram donut holes, these kiddos are getting insane amounts. They have absolutely no idea that they contain THC. So again, I just wanted to highlight this and just bring awareness to the cases that we're seeing. Specifically, this is just kids 0 to 5.
Thank you, Christy. And this is specific to the accidental ingestion. This is not really representative of children who maybe are intentionally treated with cannabis.
Accidental. So another aspect or thing to know, I guess, about the poison center world, it's pretty much understood that any child 5 years of age or less don't have the cognitive ability to distinguish, something good to eat versus something not good to eat. And so that's why I really focused in on this population. So even you have some 6, 7, 8-year-olds that they're kind of in that gray area, that maybe they go to the medication cabinet and think they're eating some gummy bears and accidentally get THC. Of course, we've seen in the news teenagers that think, again, somebody brought some gummy bears for them to share at high schools and things like that. So this does not include that. These are strictly kids that do not have the cognitive ability to know that they contain THC.
And Christy, do you have suggestions for this council on how to address this?
So probably the biggest one that would put, I think, a big stop to a lot of it is the institution of a serving size. So if you look at some other states, they have serving sizes. So some of them are 10 milligrams, some are 20, some are 25, and then making sure that those are individually packaged so that kids are opening a package and they might get whatever the serving size is, 10 or 25, and they're not opening a package of chips and getting 600 milligrams of THC. So I think that would definitely cut down on our severe exposures that we're seeing.
Thank you, Christy. And do we have questions on the council for Christy or comments?
Dr. Edlin,
Dr. Brennan.
Off the top of your head, what is the percentage of medical marijuana ingestions compared to other medications that are being ingested by children, like mom's labetalol or dad's Percocet?
I'm hesitant to venture a guess. I will tell you it's commonplace for us to see, so on a day like today, so every morning we have, medical providers that come through on rotation with us. And so we sit down and look at all of our open active cases for that day. Any given day, we usually have at least 3 or 4 medical marijuana kiddos that we're following. And I would say, like, to answer your question, usually maybe 1 or 2 cases of kiddos. So it's probably, I would say it's a significant portion of whenever we're speaking of medications.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we move on to Dr. Brown?
One brief question.
Oh, Mr. Lewis.
The premise is this is all manufactured and processed goods. Is that the right takeaway, or would this also include home grows and people not locking up their own supply, or home manufactured goods?
Again, I actually do have the list of the 270. I would say by and large, most all of them are edible products. So kiddos finding, the gummy bears, the cookies, the candies, the chips, I would say by and large, I'm venturing a guess to say that it would be more of your processed things that are being packaged in enticing ways for children.
Christy, does your agency have resources available that dispensaries or other operators can make available to patients that, spell out, process to follow in the event of an accidental consumption or anything like that?
We would actually love to work with dispensaries and getting that information out to you guys. So handing out, I love the bill that it has to be now in opaque packaging. I think that would deter it, if a kid can't see, the cookie or the gummy bears or something like that. But also maybe putting in a little pamphlet into the bag with that goes home with the parent, just to say, hey, keep this locked up and away out of kiddos.
If and when you prepare that, let us know.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and I think the packaging actually is required to be clear now. The exit package is opaque, which exit package is just a fancy word for a bag, like a shopping bag.
Okay.
Is it required to be clear or allowed to be clear?
May.
Okay.
That's where they got with legislative back and forth and negotiations. But Christy, when we were at the CANRA conference, we got to meet with a lot of other states, and I've been impressed. There are other states, for example, Colorado, that have done kind of public education around this specific issue and encouraging patients to keep their medications locked up, put them high where kids can't reach them and that kind of thing. So that's something we're talking about internally, maybe even partnering with some other state agencies to move forward on that type of education advertising.
Yeah, and we would love to partner with you guys as well.
All right, thank you. Dr. Ryan Brown, thank you for taking your time to be here today. You are next on our agenda.
Thank you. So other than probably Dr. Busk and myself, nobody in this room has probably had the opportunity to talk to a family that they were about to get their child intubated because of the effects of THC. So I myself, Dr. Busk, have got to see firsthand the effects of THC on our kids in the communities and such. And so fortunately, the majority of the kids have done well. We haven't had any deaths in Oklahoma. But what we have seen is ill effects, issues, believing that the kids have had to be taken out of school because they were sick at school. Parents are having to take off of work to come. So we are seeing a lot of cost loss in workforce for them to come. But mainly for me is we're seeing a lot of the anxiety, a lot of the issues being put on the children, having to go through lab sticks. If you've never seen a 3-year-old wig out on THC, it's something that I wish you don't have to see. And the burden of this, I honestly will probably put on the medical providers who are actually prescribing these cards. So when you had your question as to how can we better educate our patients on this, that falls on the medical providers. And so I would like to see something in the form that when these patients are getting their medical cards, if I have a patient come to me and I'm going to prescribe them a medication, I make sure that they understand what that medication does, the risk and the benefits of not taking it correctly. And so don't know if the medical providers are doing that when they are getting or prescribing, and I say that word very loosely, prescribing the medical marijuana cards. And so that burden I would like to see put on the medical providers who, in my opinion, some are practicing outside their licensing. There are, if you look at the list of an 18-page list on the OMA website, there are over 270 providers listed on that list. Some are ENTs, some are GI doctors, some are family medicine, some are psychiatrists, some are eye doctors, and they're prescribing medications that they normally would not prescribe in their practice. So again, I put that on their burden. And if we're looking at, well, how do we, a great idea that Dr. Edelman had mentioned was putting, paraphernalia or something, or pamphlets in with the product when they leave the dispensaries and such. That cost should then go back also onto the medical providers. How much does it cost for a medical provider to get, if I want to prescribe medical marijuana, how much does it cost for me to register? Does anybody know? I don't know. I don't know. So, quick math. There are 385 patients in Oklahoma, okay, that have their medical marijuana card. At $150 a person to get there, to go to the doctor, that's $57 million. When you divide that by the number of medical providers on that list, each medical provider is making on average $210,000 a year off of their patients. I think that they can afford to give up a little bit of that money to provide for the information to go towards prevention of these ingestions. And another thing, we're so focused on the medical product coming from Oklahoma, some of the providers on that list don't even live in Oklahoma. And so that's something that I would like to see happen is, if you look on the list, some of them don't even have an address. It's all virtual. And so you're talking to a pediatrician in California, and that money's going to California instead of Oklahoma. So anyway, I just want to put that out there. But I would like to see something put on the burden of the provider to provide information for that.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. And normally we have a representative from the DO board, the Osteopathic Physicians Board, but he is out today. We'll make sure that he gets the minutes and understands your recommendation. And did you have anything else that you wanted to add during your time? Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you for the perspective of you're seeing this firsthand, and I know you came to us to want to be included in this conversation because you're seeing it firsthand, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, and real quick, and I apologize, the legislature has already set the precedence for getting their medical marijuana card revoked, because we just saw in House Bill, if you provide medical marijuana to someone that's not, 3 strikes and you get your card revoked. I hate to see us put that same legislature on if a minor in your possession gets into medical marijuana 3 times, we'll revoke that, because they will then not report it. They will then keep their child. It has happened. It will happen. They won't report that ingestion, and kids will just be sicker at home, and ill effects will happen.
I could be wrong, but I believe the transfer to an unauthorized person is for value, no?
Did I read that after the third one, you can have your medical marijuana license revoked? Did I read that wrong?
Can you repeat your question?
Did I not read that? I forgot which House bill it was, that if you transfer the product to someone that's not authorized, after 3, it's like a $400 fine, a $1,000 fine, and after the 3rd offense, you have your medical marijuana card revoked.
So as it relates to transfers from patients to non-authorized individuals, there is a distinction between transferring for value and just sharing or transferring without value. The sharing, as long as it's under 3 grams, is just a simple $400 administrative fine. It will not result in the revocation of a license. The transfer for value is what you described, where it's
$800 fine, or no, $400, $1,000, and then revocation of license.
Yeah, but that still is a precedent that you can lose your medical marijuana license.
Correct.
Because of misuse of it.
Correct.
Okay.
Dr. Mills?
You know, I'd like to commend both these people for bringing this stuff up. I think this is something that needs to kind of float to the top with the cream, and it needs to be an ongoing effort to keep this kind of available to the council and OMA, and hopefully to the citizens. I would recommend that you start tracking what these kids are ingesting. You know, whether it's a homemade brownie or a commercial gummy or, you know, whatever. It would probably be really helpful to kind of help get that crosshairs down on what we might be able to do to fix this. I know that the medical marijuana people, the true medical marijuana people that really are using this for valuable service to them, don't want to see reduction in dosages. But I think I sure would like to see somebody say that a 5-gram gummy is not acceptable. Okay.
I don't even know what to say. You're telling me there are 5-gram gummies? Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Mills. And you're a pharmacist as well. You are a pharmacist and you are in the industry. So that feedback is, it helps marry the sides together. And I'd like to talk with you about continuing this conversation towards what we can do to help. But Christy, I think, or Dr. Edelin, that's valuable information. In order for us to really be out front on this, we do need to know a little more about what the children are ingesting. Is that something you guys can track? Okay, great.
Sorry, my microphone doesn't work. But yes, so like I said, I have a list of the 270 here, and I would say 95+% are all edible products.
Do you know if they are purchased products or homemade? That's the other piece that could be helpful, just to help identify how children are getting their hands on these products.
So how we have it now, we're not tracking that, but that's definitely something that we could track. I will say that we do receive photos. You know, we ask tons of questions about, you know, tell us about the packaging and things like that. 600 milligram bags of chips are nothing. Like, well, we've seen those across the board that are, again, I don't know, we don't ask questions about where these things are being purchased. So I don't know exact dispensaries or anything like that, but bags of chips that contain 600 milligrams. And like I said, we had a kiddo that ingested one donut hole that had 1 gram of THC in it.
Thank you. All right, we're moving on to what I think everybody's here for. The council metric updates. So the purpose for this item 6C is for you to ask questions, let us know things, tell us what's going on. We will answer to the best of our ability, but I will warn you that there may be questions that we need to take back to the office and analyze further. So any promises that were made to you that there will be answers here were not vetted through us. So no promises. All right, council members.
I'll start it off then.
Anticlimactic. Okay.
Okay. I have a handful of issues just either to bring to your attention or for clarification. First is, at some point or another, you had made a comment about how for dispensaries with untagged product for COAs to get into metric, we need to go into metric, make a notation of the test results up until the point at which all of it has to be tagged and validly in metric. To my knowledge, that functionality was locked out in tandem with the beginning inventory, the ability to notate testing results.
Okay, Becky is behind you, shaking her head no, and I'm going to recognize her to answer your question.
So the ability to add notes has not been locked out. You should still be able to add notes to those products that you entered as beginning inventory if you didn't add them at the time.
It was, I believe the functionality locked out was specifically inputting in the THC percentage field, for example, what that result was. So you're saying those should go in?
It's just going to go in a note, correct.
Okay.
It required you to put the lab that tested it, the sample number that the lab gave to that sample, and then the testing results. So test passed, the metals, pesticides, whatever, and then if you want to include your specific potency in that note, you can.
Perfect.
Follow up?
This one I'm presuming y'all are aware of. Normal course of business, samples are involved, specifically from a grow to a dispensary that they're trying to get to purchase their product, for example. There is no real provision for what to do there in the regs. Essentially, my understanding of it is we would have to, in metric, flow that sample product tagged all the way down to, call it the dispensary level, theoretically penny it out to a bud tender, for example. Is that the ongoing method here? That's in day-to-day business operations, sampling is part of it, obviously, and that's a very clunky path to have to take. Nor is it able to be done by a processor receiving a sample of a grow's flower, for example, in which case they do not have the ability to, end it with a patient whom they cannot sell to. Thoughts on how to do this moving forward? Is there any plan to provide for sampling?
Would you mind talking to us more about this later? Like after this meeting?
Sure.
Just so we want to make sure we understand the issue completely, and then probably need to huddle up back at our office to analyze it and see what we need to do.
Okay. And a related question then. Yep. Display samples for patients to, in a smell pod, to be able to smell the product, et cetera. That is defined specifically in the regs as what can happen with it on the table, like it needs to be sealed, et cetera, et cetera. How do we terminate that product? We're never going to sell it to a patient. Does it have to go directly back to waste? And in that event, that's a pretty significant cost burden on the dispensary specifically. If every time we sell through a strain, we have to call a waste operator to come out and pick up that 3 grams.
So there shouldn't be a requirement that you have to waste that specific 3 grams by itself. You can add that 3 grams with other waste into a waste package tag and have that assimilated before you need to have that come and picked up by a waste disposal company.
That was my understanding of how to treat it, but because this is a specifically defined display sample, whatever the verbiage is, in our practice up until metric, essentially the way that we would handle that is we would, from all of our dispensaries, we would route waste, whether it be sample or otherwise, back to our wholesale business unit, which would then have a waste pickup coming regularly. We've discontinued that since metric due to the inability to do that, but that would be ideal if we could consolidate in some capacity and move product upstream if the destination is waste ultimately. It would help us logistically and with our cost.
Yeah, that's something we can take back to our office and consider.
Sure.
Talk about it a little more.
That's all I've got.
Mr. Duzan.
I talked to a number of labs prior to the meeting, and from the lab perspective, what we run into is we will do the testing, we'll enter the results, and then it just locks up, says waiting for testing. We open a ticket. Sometimes, like 2-3 days later, good, goes on. Sometimes it's 2-3 weeks. Sometimes we don't get an explanation as to why it was hung up to start with, whether it's something we did or something that the grower or whatever did prior to sending it to us, which makes it hard on us because the lady that does this for me, if they say, oh, it's because of this, she keeps a logbook and says, okay, well, next time I'll check these 10 things. We don't always get that. Sometimes it just miraculously just goes on, and it's frustrating on our end sometimes, and metric in itself is incredibly clunky, I think is the nice way to put it. So.
Noted and understood. Becky?
So what we're seeing so far is that licensees are not batching, tagging, and submitting for testing correctly. So sometimes it's that. If the labs, they should be able to see those manifests that are coming to them ahead of time. If they notice that the testing hasn't been ordered properly, if they stop it before they receive those samples, the licensee themselves can edit what they've ordered and correct those issues. On the backside, we're also seeing that multiple phone calls and multiple emails by the lab and the licensee, and then someone calls us and asks us to reach out to Metric, and that creates multiple tickets for the same issue, and which extends the length of time to correct the issue. So we're seeing that. So there's several issues we're making note, and a couple of those things that Director Berry mentioned at the beginning, we're trying to fix those issues. But the main thing is if they're not batching, tagging, and submitting properly, if they're submitting to 2 labs, that's creating an issue. If they're ordering the wrong test batch type, if they order 2 test batch types and you just result into 1, but the other one's still hanging open, that locks those samples up. So,
yeah, I mean, I agree. I think most of that, there's a lot of it that is outside of our control. And it's also, we have a lot of the growers and stuff who have went through all the training, and you almost have to know what you're doing, have done it a few times to do it. It is not user-friendly. And that's where they run up. They have all these buttons, and we have people, they just push them all. And one of them says R&D. So then it gets locked up. And, and we, after the fact, can't edit. They can't edit. It has to go through Metric. And yes, that's their error, but it just seems like a lot of this, it's just incredibly clunky that there's buttons that show up that they push that shouldn't be there for, if they're submitting raw flour, then there's other stuff for different products. It just seems not very well thought out, but that's all.
Mr. Irvin?
Perhaps I had intended to talk about one thing. Now I'm going to address maybe that and talk about another. Anytime an agency or a business creates any software or major changes in software that is public-facing, they may want to consider 2 things. One, having beta testing groups that prior to the implementation are able to access that software, do the things that they need to do, make the transfers, create the whatever pieces of information are necessary within that software, and then they can find the trouble spots They can identify places where the technology can be upgraded or improved, but also find out where the frequently asked questions might be, and then the agency or the companies can then create a frequently asked questions page in order to address those questions prior to implementation. Upon implementation, one might consider using a sandbox, and it's what we call it, where you, as the user, the companies interfacing, can go in and play around. So they are actually, in this case, would be creating manifests, creating transfers, sending products to the testing labs, creating transfers to other business entities within that software, and then they can play around with it and see what they're doing and how to do it and what the pitfalls are, and they can make all the mistakes in the sandbox, and they don't have real-life consequences of burning through 200 metric tags while they're trying to learn the software and learn the system. And I would just encourage that with any business, with any agency, and any kind of large upgrade and of any public-facing technology to implement those two steps. And I believe it would tremendously reduce any problems, and also shouldn't have to be mentioned, but have many, many people on the call answering the call logs and the call phone when people call in and have questions. And so with that, I will just move on to the real reason I guess I pushed my button initially is probably I'm going to describe it as a soliloquy of my thoughts on what I believe could be a potentially impending crisis in the next 30 or 45 days within the industry. Metric is, and the rules require that all testing done prior to metric implementation be uploaded by, I believe the date is July 26th. And my understanding is that is a court order, that is not a OMA discretion date. Without another court date, that date cannot be moved. So in the industry, we are told the process is to create truly a non-existent transfer. We are creating a transfer for a product that is not going to be moved. Initially, we were told we needed to feloniously attest to the fact that we transfer these. Now we have a workaround that we can do an electronic transfer. We do not have to show that someone physically delivered.
I'm going to object that we ever told you to feloniously attest to anything, but go ahead.
So that is true. You did not require licensees to fail to deliver the product. That is absolutely true. But we would not have, because we recognize that those would create felonies on our part if we attested that we delivered that 1/100th of 1 gram to a testing lab, signed a paper, a sheet on a government document that said we sent that, and we did not. Now we can do it by saying that it is an electronic transfer, and that takes away the potential felonies from our business licensees. But we must still use a tag for a non-existent transfer. So we literally tear a tag off of the roll and throw it in the trash, because it is not to be attached to anything that is being transferred, because nothing is being transferred. Then we have to go back and reconcile inventories, because this non-existent transfer shows we transferred some product outside of our inventory. I would think that would make it harder for OMMA to sift through, because you have all of these non-existent transfers that occur, all of these changes in inventory that did not occur, and it must create more work on your agency. In addition, many labs in the run-up to metric implementation changed their software system. So they no longer have access to testing that was done prior to their software implementation. So now we have someone trying to comply with testing done prior to metric and no longer have access to that testing. All during this time, in an attempt to be compliant, the inventory is locked. Cannot make sales of that inventory of any of those SKUs while this testing is being uploaded, which is problematic. So we began working early on, day one, with our testing laboratory and sending small batches so that they could do these on a daily basis rather than sending them 200 and however many SKUs we have and have our inventory locked down for an extended period of time. Now these laboratories are being asked to implement all of this prior testing into metric. I would guesstimate hundreds of hours for each and every testing lab out there to upload this with absolutely zero compensation for that work. They gain nothing from it. So clearly, the laboratory is not incentivized to help producers with their compliance issues. So we have a system that requires an unnecessary use of tags, workarounds, inventory held hostage, and those that we need in order to help us be compliant are incentivized not to help us be in compliance. The penalty, if you don't get in compliance, you either have to destroy the product or you have to pay for a new test. If I'm a testing lab, I can tell you where my incentive would be. Now, again, we work closely with our laboratory on a daily basis and have for 3 years. They've been very, very kind to us. But even with our early start, even with all of the close work we do, we are on the phone with Metric and OMMA, and I'm sorry to whoever is answering our calls. I apologize now. We expected to be 66% through our upload of prior testing by today. We are about 15% through that process. So I think we share a common expectation of the level of compliance that we believe people in Oklahoma who are unable to get this product testing uploaded by July 26th. But I think perhaps in another universe, maybe everyone might not be so compliant. And they might begin to explore alternative outlets for that product that is no longer viable within the metric system. And I believe that very few, and from my conversations with testing labs, very few have begun this process. And we are now 5 weeks out from that, from the magic date. There will be a flood of anxious, scared people calling these labs, begging them to get their testing uploaded. And quite frankly, these testing labs are not going to have the personnel, the ability to get that done. And you are going to have hundreds of thousands of grams of product that is not viable in this market, in the metric system. And to do that, they would have to get that product retested. And in these extremely small and shrinking margins within this market, I would say that would be highly unlikely for most producers. I would just encourage the agency. I know many of you. I know your hearts. I know your hearts are in the right place. I know you want to do the right thing. So I'm asking you, I'm begging you, find a way to streamline this process. Find a way so that honest people are not forced into some sort of untoward behavior because of a process that is such a maze and so complicated, and the deck is completely stacked against them with everybody else that they need to help them is incentivized to not help them. So please find a way. There are multiple avenues or paths that can be taken that we can avoid this crisis that is, in my mind, imminent. And I know I'm happy to work with you. I know that many, many people in this room will be happy to work with you to find that path that we can protect the safety of the users, of the customers, the patients. We can satisfy the needs of OMMA, and we can still help these producers get compliant. They want to be. But it's virtually impossible at this point for them to be. So with that, I would just say, please reach out. Thank you.
So can I make one comment?
Please do.
So on the website, there were multiple options of how to enter your previously tested product testing on beginning inventory samples. You are not obligated to only have the lab upload those results. You did have the option to go in and put a note on that tag and just list the lab name, the sample ID number that the lab assigned to that testing, and that the test results, what passed or what failed, which I assume you would not have been putting in failed beginning inventory. So that would be a way that any licensee can go ahead and get all that in on their beginning inventory by July the 24th. So you did have the option to create that test sample, transfer it, and allow the lab to upload the results, but that was not the only way that you could enter information about testing.
Yeah, this issue was brought up when I went in front of a crowd in Ponca City. And it was explained to me what was going on, and we spent, a week in crisis mode coming up with a solution to get out to licensees. We wanted to make sure that what we were doing was fair to every layer of our licensee. So we did speak with many, many people in the industry. That day, a room full of people let me know a lot of things. So the implication that we're not speaking to the industry is untrue. But we also put out communication about this 60-day testing window well before the May 26th deadline to ensure that there was time for businesses to get ahead of it. But we will take I'll go back and I want to go back and listen to everything you said and make sure I understand the layers of what you are addressing, because I'm not sure that I do right now, to be honest with you. But I'm going to go back and listen, and if I have questions, I will give you a call so we can figure out how address this. And I know we have some other some other producers, as you said, on the council, if anyone wants to chime in and give their experience.
I did want to mention one more thing, if you don't mind. Anytime a lab, if they tell you they don't have your information, just keep in mind that the regulation is that they have to keep records for 7 years, even though we haven't met that 7-year time frame yet. But if we walked in there and wanted test results from the very first month, or the first month after we required testing, they should have the ability to produce that to us. So if they're telling you we changed software and we no longer have that information, that really would not meet our regulation at this time. So
I don't think they were telling me they didn't have it. They had changed software. What they were telling me was they didn't have immediate access to it. It would take them quite a long time, and the inference was, you're out of luck.
Well, if somebody had something on that issue, I have a couple quick clarifications. Physical tags. Is that a part of the record retention requirement, or is record of the tags sufficient? As dispensaries, we're starting to pile up these physical tags.
I know for a fact, Blake, that that's in our FAQs. I just don't know the answer off the top of my head. So I want to also make sure you guys have seen it. We have a searchable PDF where every single question that comes in, we add it to this list. And we've been doing it for months now. And I go back to it all the time when I'm asked questions. So what we can do is search that document now, do you mind? And find the answer for you.
Cool. Follow-up to that is, I'd asked this before, but I'm being told to go to Metric, Bioma, and vice versa. Initially, dispensaries were required to tag all beginning inventory in April of 21. That was walked back due to the settlement, where we do no longer have to do that. So I'm sitting on, no exaggeration, 20,000 unusable tags that I can't, I assume I'm not going to be able to get a refund on or transfer to another entity that we had bought in advance of doing our beginning inventories for the dispensaries.
Is it the same license number? Is that why you can't use them?
It's multiple license numbers. Each of our dispensaries had purchase tags in April 21, getting ready to tag it all for the beginning inventory, then the lawsuit, and now dispensaries don't have to do that at all. Now we've got this 90-day window to inbound tagged items, and then at the end, waste or dispose of. So now I've got all these specific to the dispensary tags that I can't use.
I see. You can, you're just not required to, is what you're saying.
Well, the only use case for them, would be 1 gram non-infused pre-rolls. Otherwise, a dispensary is not originating product, so what will we be tagging?
Well, it would have been before May 26th, but yeah.
Right.
So Metric is telling you this is an OMA question? I see.
Yeah, and vice versa.
I don't know that we have that as an FAQ, so we'll take that down and find you an answer, and we'll follow up.
If y'all could just tell Metric to allow us to repurpose them for a new license or give us our money back, equally sufficient for me.
Okay, Becky behind you has a comment.
So what we're being told is that the tags are unique for a specific license number, and those tag numbers tie back to that specific license. So they're not going to be able to transfer those tags to another license because they would tie back to the one they were made for.
That's what he was saying. But I don't want you to be penalized for being ahead of the game and being prepared in April of 21. But I also think that there's some nuance here on what can be done with those tags. So let me look into it more.
I suspect you're correct that we cannot transfer them, and which leaves us with option B, give us our money back. This is a dispensary-specific problem, but anybody who was preparing for the initial implementation likely has a whole bunch of tags that they can't do anything with because of what she mentioned, inability to transfer, and OMMA and Metric kicking the can back to each other.
They kick everything to us. We don't, yeah. We're working on it.
That's also been my experience.
Okay, so we'll work on a solution for that. And then, did you have any other items?
I think we were just waiting on the answer on the physical tag record requirement.
Thank you. All right, who else has questions? Can you pull up, Stephanie, will you go to oma.ok.gov? I'm gonna show you guys where to find this right now. I also shared it on my Twitter if you follow me. Yeah, go to seed to sale information. Just go to FAQs. And then do you see where it says this searchable PDF? Okay, so now do Control F and look for, what was the question?
What do we do with the physical tags?
Oh, retention. Search the word retention. Okay, record. Search word record. Michael to the rescue. What you're looking at represents this guy right here and his team collecting every single question that has come to us and finding an answer, tracking down an answer. Okay. Throwing it away as a business decision is not required for record retention.
Clarify, that says plant tags. We're talking about all tags then.
Michael says yes, but so let's change the wording. If that's all tags, let's change it from plant tags to all tags.
Cool. Appreciate that. Our vault is getting pretty full of stickers.
All right. What other questions do we have from the council regarding metric? Mr. Kell?
This will be over sales, growers, processors, or whatever. And I spoke earlier with someone, and they said it would probably have to go to the legislature. But as it's required right now, if you're a salesperson in a grow or a processor, and you're taking your sales cases out to show prospective clients, dispensaries, what have you, you have to make a manifest going from each dispensary, correct? Okay, they have to reject that, and then you have to record it back into metric every time. Is there some way possible that we can get where you manifest that to the salesperson? The salesperson has 48 hours to manifest it back to the company that it was selling for. Before, right now they would be running with way over the legal limit to show dispensaries.
Yeah, I think this is one of those, it's been interesting. So since after February 25th, when the court lifted that stay, we started getting a lot of questions, and a lot of them were just people that have been violating our rules the whole time, but now they're going to get caught. And this is one of those areas. So I had our staff look it up so I'd be able to answer this because I knew it was coming. 63 OS 427.16 uppercase T. So the inventory manifest shall be prepared at the origination point of the medical marijuana. So I think that it has to be prepared at the origination point, and it must also have an end point. And that's where there would have to be a statutory change in order for us to be able to interpret it any other way in our rules. Yeah.
So that would be something for the legislature to work on next year?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Other questions from the council? All right, so now our next agenda item is council member updates. So what we could do is just allow you to offer an update, or I could go around and require you to give an update. Which one do you guys prefer? I'll just offer. If you have an update from your area, we'd really love to hear it. So you really haven't heard much from patient or agency members of the council. Oh, Ms. Hawkins.
It seems
Ms.
like
Hawkins.
I'm
I'm calling on Ms. Hawkins, who's behind you and raised her hand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep. Ms. Hawkins.
We're from Northwest Oklahoma, and that's something that's really not ever represented over here. So I just kind of want to tell you the trend that we're seeing. Patients are reporting an extreme shortage of product, that we can't get it out there because everybody's getting ready for metric. They're, sucking up all their products. And so that's just a trend that's going. It's happening very increased across Western Oklahoma. And so any processors that can get out there, please do. Patients are struggling. They're having to come to Oklahoma City, and that's 2.5-hour drive. So anyway, that's just something that I'm seeing.
Thank you. Anyone else? No, I'm just kidding. Mr. Irvin.
I'm just going to give kudos here. It seems like I always bring up problems or things that need to be resolved. I want to give kudos. I have people who visited with me that live close to grows from people who may not have necessarily been fully compliant. And because of the work of OMMA as well as OBNDD, other law enforcement entities, 2 of the 3 have locked the door at 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, left, and never came back. Turned the lights off, went home, wherever home was, and have not come back. So I want to give kudos because you guys have worked really, really hard, along with a lot of law enforcement efforts in our state, to get to this point. And I think the folks who don't want to be compliant are getting the message, and they are leaving as fast as they can. So kudos to OMMA and all that you do to help our industry.
Thank you. It's definitely a group effort, and it's our goal to make it better for the folks that want to be in compliance. That is truly our goal. So thank you for that feedback. All right, seeing no other council member updates, we move on to 6E, which is discussion and questions over council member updates. Any of those? And let's see.
I would just like to say that, personally with what Dr. Ellen and I spoke about with the after sale issues, but I don't have a dog in the fight with what's going on with the seed to sell portion. But I would highly recommend to the OMMA that after November 1st, that they contain or still have some semblance of the board so that we can continue dialogue like this, because I feel sorry for whoever's going to answer the phone with thousands of phone calls that we have and other folks have. So I think this is a great forum to hopefully continue after November 1st.
Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is any matter not known about or which could not have been reasonably foreseen 24 hours prior to the meeting from council members. So that means if you have something unforeseen that you would like to add to the agenda, this is your chance. All right, now we are going to close, adjourn, and dismiss. We are done for today. Thank you all, and we will have a meeting in September. You'll get more info soon.
Hey, point of clarity. Does your adjournment need a vote?
Oh, wait. Hold on, we do need to, if you're on the council, thank you so much. You do.
I motion for an adjournment.
I'll second.
We have a motion for an adjournment, and we have a second.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Thank you.